Welcome back, honors. All right, welcome back to Flip Classroom and whatnot. I know we haven't had one of these things in a minute, but it's mainly due to the fact that we've been going for Ida and storms and like all this other crazy stuff. However, I do definitely want to say, go ahead and give y'all a huge shout out. A lot of y'all did super well on that first test. I'm very, very impressed with how well y'all are doing so far. I will definitely probably have those back to you definitely by class tomorrow, or at least at the end of the day. I know Emma Ruddy, I know you rolled in, thought I was going to have it done, but I got all these kids are freaking out. They're like, I have my first test tomorrow, and they're all flipping out. So I will have them done to you as fast as possible, but as it's looking right now, y'all did really, really well. I'm actually super, super impressed with how well a lot of y'all did, because actually we're seeing lots of 90, over 90, some A's, some B's, some other grades and stuff too, but we'll talk about those things later on individually with all of you, not in front of everybody. But anyway, we're now getting into your next unit, right? We're now getting into our new unit, our next unit. We're going to be talking about a very, very all-important thing known as ancient Greece, right? So, and I know Gianna right now is like, yeah, I know stuff about that. You probably do know a good little bit about ancient Greece already, but 9 times out of 10, you actually know mostly about ancient Greece coming from this section of their history over here. Some of you probably think you're talking about, like, what section? There's sections of ancient Greek history? Yeah, there actually is. It's really important to understand that there's a huge, massive pantheon when it comes to ancient Greek history. You could argue that the ancient Greeks started in 7000 BC if you're looking at their earliest Neolithic roots, but if we actually are looking at, like, kind of just their earliest civilizations, we usually look at about, like, 3500 BC, right? So 3500 years before the birth of Christ, we saw the earliest, like, involvement and earliest settlements of major civilizations of what we now refer to as Greece, right? And they're going to go all the way up to 31 BC. So you're talking about a huge, massive, over 3,000-year-long ancient society, right? And a lot of you know that they existed. You know that there's gods and goddesses. You've seen Hercules. Heck yeah, me too. Love that flick, right? So really, really, really good stuff. But it's also my favorite Disney movie, just a heads up. Now, really, really fast, though, something you got to understand, though, too, is that they actually had, much like the ancient Egyptians, a very, very deep history that involved several different time periods. And just to give you a heads up, there are 8 Greek time periods, okay? So we're going to go ahead and write those things out really, really fast. I'm going to speed it up, though, so you can actually see how this is going, okay? So we've got... All right. So as you can see, we have 8 different Greek time periods. And what I'm definitely going to need you to do, too, is do me a favor and kind of like underline the first letters of everything, okay? So we'll have like Neolithic, Early Bronze, Minoan, Mycenaean, Dark Age, Archaic, Classical, Hellenistic. Now, these are a lot harder to remember than those ancient Egyptian time periods, right? The ancient Egyptian time periods were just like, there's a kingdom period, and that was good, and then there was an intermediate period, and that was bad. All right, so, and I know that those are easier to remember, and these are, you're probably thinking to yourself, you're like, well, Mr. Jerry, I don't understand. How am I going to remember all the differences between these two things? I am going to give you a mnemonic device in class tomorrow to help you like remember the different ones. But we have Neolithic, Early Bronze, Minoan, Mycenaean, Dark Ages, Archaic, Classical, and the Hellenistic period, right? And those ranged in dates from about 7000 BC to 3100 BC, these two being in the early 7000s BC, and then the 3500 BC starting about right there. So most of the ancient Greek stuff that you know of already actually involves this set of time periods, right? You know mostly of the things that happened in the back half of their century, right? Because the Dark Ages is going to see the actual foundations of some of the things that you know mostly as being very Greek, mostly the Greek language, and a lot of other different writing styles and things like that that are going to pop up, a lot of different cultural things, different food items that are going to like start to exist then. In the Archaic period, you're going to see the rise of Athens and Sparta, and then Classical period, you're going to have the rise of classical Athens, and the Hellenistic period is Alexander the Great, right? But the ones that you don't know as much about is this stuff over here, Neolithic, Early Bronze, Minoan, Mycenaean, and we are going to get in this flip all the way up to those guys right there, okay? So let's go ahead and take 2 seconds. I'm going to jump back over here to this desk really quick, and we're going to keep talking about the ancient Greeks, and we're going to talk a little bit about their geography, kind of where they came from, and a lot of other stuff like that. So see y'all in a sec. Yep, welcome back, and now we're back over here in our regularly scheduled programming, already in progress, right? We're over here actually talking about the ancient Greeks, and we just got done writing down all those time periods, right? So I like for your ancient Greek notes, your units at 2, to start off with those time periods initially, just so you can kind of create almost like a table of contents for yourself, right? Because what we're talking about today is those early Greek time periods, those first 3, right? We're going to be discussing the growing Neolithic period. We're going to talk about that in like a slide. We're going to talk about the early Bronze period in like a slide, right? And we're going to also, I think it's really important too, and I know that some of you are probably like, what the heck, Mr. Terry, I already wrote those things down. If you keep them in those 2 columns of 4, it might be a little bit easier to remember them, given the fact that we're going to change some things, add some stuff to them and stuff like that as time goes on, right? But the earliest Greek time periods, you got to have to first be able to talk about where the heck is Greece, right? So we're looking at this map of the world right now with no countries or borders. We know for a fact that, one, it's not going to be over here because those two countries don't really come into major play in European history until post-1492. Of course, Columbus, i.e. coming from Spain, found some stuff, didn't really find it, people were already there. Now, then also this is Africa, so that can't be right, and this is Asia, and that's Europe, so we've got to be around this general region somewhere. So it's around the Mediterranean, and where ancient Greece is, so if we know it's around the Mediterranean, then it's not that one, that's Spain, and it's not that one, that's Italy. Ancient Greece is right here, all right? So ancient Greece, very, very important area that kind of exists in this general region. Now, ironically enough, we talked about the very first thing is this island off the shore, but this right here is modern-day Greece, right? It's a part of this thing known as the Balkan Peninsula, and it looks about like this, right? So this is ancient Greece, also including the island of Crete, which we'll talk about, which is down here. Now, some of y'all are looking at this and you're like, Mr. Terry, that's not Greece. That's a hurricane map. No, it's not, all right? So I know this looks like a map of a hurricane or whatever that, like, of course, too soon, Ida. Now, I know that it looks like kind of a storm map, but this is actually a topographical map of Greece. So what you're going to learn earliest on about Greece, especially about their geography, is everything about the ancient Greece is different from every other ancient society we've talked about so far. When we talked about ancient Egypt, we talked about the Nile River Valley. When we talked about Mesopotamia, we talked about the Tigris and the Euphrates River valleys. When we talked about Canaan, we talked about their area bordering where now is modern-day Israel, right? So the big major difference that you can initially already see about ancient Greece is that this is a topographical map. This is a measurement of elevation. So Greece is covered in mountainous terrain. So it's very, very important that we understand that Greek geography plays a major, major important role in the settlement of this area and also the growth of this ancient civilization. First and foremost, they are mountainous, right? Ancient Greece is extremely mountainous, which is going to divide a lot of the earliest settlements, making each of these settlements very, very unique from one another. You need to write this word down. This is very important. This is your first vocabulary term when it comes to ancient Greece. Now look, that term is geographic isolation, right? So basically, in a nutshell, what ended up happening here in this ancient Greek area is that we actually ended up with several different city-states that all played major, major roles, and they actually worked off of each other. You didn't have one central Egyptian-style culture that existed around one centralized area. It was much more like Mesopotamia, and a series of different city-states, right? Throughout ancient Greek history, we had Mycenae and the Minoans, and then later on, we had Ionia and Corinth and Megara and Syracuse and Athens and Sparta. And the crazy part about it is much like the Mesopotamians, they shared some cultural values, but the mountainous terrain, because of this geographic isolation, kept them separate from one another, leading to very, very different styles of culture, right? For example, the first two that we'll talk about, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, had very unique style cultures from one another, right? The other big thing you need to remember is the large body of water that borders them, right? They're a mountainous country that is bordered by the Aegean Sea, right? Notice I have not talked about a river valley yet because river valleys are not super important to the settlement of ancient Greece. Actually, their sea plays much more of a role when it comes to their settlement and their prosperity when you're talking about ancient Greece. So the Aegean Sea is the actual sea that's kind of right to the south and to the west. It's a smaller sea, a part of the Mediterranean, right? Now, the Aegean played a major thing, though, because ancient Greece and the Aegean Sea was home to a lot of different natural harbors, right? Tons and tons and tons of natural harbors. What a natural harbor is an area where a boat can easily pull up, drop anchor, and actually then go off to the shore and communicate and trade different items. So, ancient Greece, which you can already tell, is not nearly as dependent on agriculture as much as they're probably going to be dependent on, that is exactly right, Damari, trade, right? So they're going to be much more dependent on trade because of this mountainous terrain and things like that, and also their contact with the ocean. So also, the sea, the Aegean Sea in general, was home to tons and tons of different islands that offer great contact with other civilizations in terms of trade, sometimes war. So what is Greece going to be immediately? A very huge hub of cultural diffusion, right? So their climate is usually on average of about 75 degrees, so it's a very, very mild Mediterranean-style climate. But the big thing that's important to remember is that their farmland was terrible, right? So Greek farmland is not good. They only have about 20% of the land in Greece is farmable, which is much, much lower than ancient Egypt, who just literally planted things with such ease, and then the Mesopotamians, who planted things much easier using their irrigation systems and things like that. So terrible farmland in Greece with access to the ocean and mountainous terrain is going to lead to city-states that are very unique and dependent on trade, right? So the Greeks are going to have to communicate with the Phoenicians and other empires to get certain staples that they can't grow where they are, right? They would trade things like fish and olive oil and cheese and other kinds of pottery and things like that for simple things like grains and cereals and other base items that they needed, right? So with this, though, you have to also understand that time is going to be divided into manageable chunks, and the first one we start off with is the Neolithic Era, right? Now notice I said only 20% of their land is farming. So what little land allowed for farming and major farming operations, that is where the earliest Greeks are going to settle. So we had artifacts showing as far back as 6,000, possibly 7,000 BC, we saw the earliest settlements in ancient Greece, or like in that Balkan peninsula. And there was farming and small pieces of pottery and other ancient items, because apparently, literally, everybody made pots for like a long time, right? Legit, it's one of the biggest ways that we have like studied ancient people is by one, looking at their pottery, and two, looking at their garbage, all right? So we actually have used a lot of different archaeological methods to study trash piles and things like that to understand what did people eat, what did they use, how did they make items, and looking through their broken items, we then reconstructed them, like as such you can see this broken pot right here, to understand them a little bit better. But the Neolithic period offers us up one giant disadvantage. They didn't have a writing system, so they didn't document anything, so they never became a major civilization yet, right? Then moving on, we then moved into what's known as the early Bronze period. I told you, we're moving through these early Greek time periods really, really quickly due to the fact that we are not going to sit around and talk about, well, the Neolithic Greeks, they farmed. Right, so we got to move, we got to keep going. So the other next one we're going to talk about is then following the Neolithic period, around 2900 to 2000 BC, we moved into a period where they stopped making things so much out of stone and clay, and then they would eventually move into making things out of bronze, right? Bronze, the early Bronze period, or the start of the Bronze Age, right? Because you can actually divide those two columns, right? We have the two columns. We have the Neolithic, early Bronze, Minoan, Mycenaean period over on this side. That's what's known as your Bronze Age Greeks, and then the ones on the right, the Dark Ages, Archaic, Classical, Hellenistic, there's your Iron Age Greeks, right? But the early Bronze period is going to start around 2900 BC and go all the way up to about 2000 BC, and it's going to be defined by the introduction of the metal known as bronze. It's going to be used to create weapons and pots and armor and many other different types of things. And what bronze is, jot this down, it's very important. Bronze is a simple alloy that is much easier to make and easier to smelt. Minecraft fans, calm down. It's much easier to smelt than iron, right? So bronze is actually the combination of two different metals, copper and tin, right? By combining those two metals together, you could make a much easier to metallurge and actually to make of a metal item out of those two different items, right? So you had bronze, right? The Hyksos knew how to make bronze, and they brought it to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians then brought it to other people, and they spread throughout the Mediterranean area and eventually jumped over into Greece, and the Phoenicians would trade bronze items with them and show them how to actually smelt the stuff, right? So bronze items are going to pop up, though, around 2900 to 2000. Now, those items will carry forward. However, boom, then all of a sudden, we saw the birth of the first Westerners in, I didn't dab again, I didn't, I swear. Now, anyway, but the big thing, though, is the very first Westerners show up, right? The very first Western civilization can kind of be nailed down to these guys, right? The Minoans, who are going to get into conflict with the Mycenaeans later, but the Minoans are the very first, very important ones, who, ironically enough, weren't even settled on mainland Greece. This area of Greece right here is known as Peloponnese, right? They weren't settled right here. They actually started out on this island right here. So do me a favor, in your notes, write Minoans in nice capital letters, and you can put a little exclamation mark. The first thing you need to know is that they were founded on a small island known as the island of Crete, C-R-E-T-E. This island right here became the home of the very first major civilization to exist in ancient Greece. We refer to these people as ancient Greek, even though ironically enough, they probably didn't speak what Greeks spoke during the Archaic period. They used a completely different writing style. They did do some things, though, that were instinctively Greek, and we will talk about those things here in a couple of seconds. But the big thing about the Minoans is that even though it ranged for 500 years, from about 2000 BC to about 1500 BC, we only know a very small amount about them. Right? We know that they were a very large, great civilization. We know that they left a lot of artifacts behind, and we know that we can get little glimpses into their life based on the small things they left behind, but we do know that we don't know nearly as much about them as we would like, right? So jumping on forward, right, we know that the Minoans, first of all, kind of indicated themselves by that 6 characteristics of a civilization. They created a writing system, right? Remember when we talked all about the 6 characteristics of a civilization, right? You got to be able to write. You got to be able to have art. You got to be able to have a religious system, a government system. You have to have a political bureaucratic system as well with a government system. You also have to have concentration and agricultural food surpluses, right? So one of the big ones, though, their writing system was known as Linear A. Now, did they call it that? No, they did not call their writing Linear A, unfortunately. We call it Linear A because we don't know what they called it. Unfortunately, we cannot translate this. This is the only piece of writing from the Minoans that we have ever found, right? This thing is the only place we have ever found Minoan writing, and it's called the facedose disc, right? So as you can already see, what little we know about the Minoans comes mostly from these artifacts that they've left behind. Now, we do know that they had a writing system, and this is the writing system that we believe that they used. This is called the facedose disc, and it literally is built in a circle and written, we believe, starting here and spiraling out all the way, right? So that right there is the writing system that the Minoans were used. We have no idea what it says. It looks nothing like later writing would ever see, and it bears no resemblance to Phoenician alphabets whatsoever. So this could be nothing for all we know, but we're pretty confident that it actually is a writing sample of the Minoans. And funny enough, I've always joked, it looks like a Frisbee. Like, it looks like Cobb's ancient ancestor probably picked it up one day and was just like, phew, and just like threw it somewhere, and then they just drew some goofy little pictures. Because tell me that this doesn't look kind of like the, what's this called? What are this guy right here, all these little repeating symbols? It looks like that dude, the whatchamacallit, the gingerbread man from Shrek, right? He's like, do you know the Muffin Man? The Muffin Man? The Muffin Man. Like, so it's the only impression that I can do well. So the big thing about it, though, is the facedose disc is the only symbol of writing that they left behind, right? And we call it Linear A because we don't know what else to call it, right? But the other big thing that we know about the Minoans is that they were master shipbuilders, and they actually were the very first Greeks to begin this idea of trade, right? Like we talked about with ancient Greece, only 20% of their land is farmable. Now, ironically enough, on Crete, some of that land of that 20% is there, right? They could grow some decent things. Funny enough, they grew things that nobody else knew how to grow, like grapes and olives, right? So the Minoans would then build large ships that were actually designed based off Phoenician vessels, which means more than likely the Phoenicians came there looking for items. They ran into the Minoans, they learned how to trade and talk with them, and then they showed them how to design ships that would actually be ready to fare the sea. Now, their legacy as master shipbuilders was a very, 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 very important piece because it shows us that the Minoans were traders, right? They were traders, much like the Phoenicians, and they would begin to create a larger network, bringing other goods that they could grow to others to bring other items like cereals and oats and different other kind of like bread-based items back to ancient Manoa, ancient Crete, and they would actually bring these items back in, right? So we do know that they were also master shipbuilders. Now, the other big one, though, this one's really, really funny. We think they also had a sport, right? So bull leaping, right? So this is kind of an image of that intellectual artistic activity, right? We believe that bull leaping is a major thing that they kind of like used or left behind. Bull leaping is one of the biggest things that we believe might have been one of their major religious ceremonies. It possibly was a sport. We don't really know. You definitely should not try this at home, right? Because bull leaping also relates to their culture in general, right? We've seen many artifacts in this in the area of Crete that have bull horns on them. We have seen bull busts. We have seen bull images, right? And now, despite these like bull artifacts that we found, Mino or Minoans actually does not necessarily mean bull, right? That actually, Mino, comes from their very, very famous king, which we'll talk about here in a second. His name was King Minos, right? So we know that bull leaping existed, though, because we found many different items like this on different panels, right? So this is actually a fresco of what we believe bull leaping possibly looked like, right? We see these 3 participants right here, and this guy is actually doing like a backflip off the back of this bull and stuff like that, which seems very, very aggressive. But this is probably me doing this awesome backflip off this bull. And then this is probably Mr. Madrano right here, just getting stabbed by the bull itself up front, as you can see. And then this is Mr. Mathern back here just cheering me on like this. So now the bull leaping, though, is an aspect we also believe that shows art and intellectual activity of the Minoan people. But nothing shows us intellectual activity more than their palace does, right? And actually, that bull leaping fresco, the images of Minoan vessels, and then also the linear A facedose disc was all found at this place, right? They had a massive city-state palace known as Knossos, right? Knossos was the large palace home to their very legendary King Minos, right? And that is where the name Minoans comes from, because of their legendary king, King Minos, which existed not only in ancient archaic Greek myths and in many other different areas, but he apparently created this city known as Knossos and built this place in the style of a labyrinth. It was the political center of the Minoan kingdom, and it is where we have found all of their artifacts that we know the most about. Here in this particular place are the major artifacts and where they've been found, and then we've also found some other artifacts and other smaller settlements that are existing throughout Crete, right? But Knossos shows us their development, their intensity, their artisticness, their intelligence, their trade atmosphere, everything about them, right? So what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to go ahead and hit stop, right? And we're going to go ahead and talk about the rest of the Minoan stuff tomorrow in class. I'll see you guys then. Y'all have a good one.